Hello YouTube. So I wanted to make a video because I've been explaining a vision of the world divided between agents, causal agents, and beings that have determined characteristics. And in a way, it's a way to categorize the differences between idealism and sort of this emergent materialism that is a dichotomy that's been sort of plaguing our society for a while, and I think it's about time we reconciled it to some extent. So the model that I've been proposing in my videos basically takes into account consciousness, takes into account emergent phenomena and materialism, and also takes into account a particular culture that would basically shine a spotlight in this sort of dichotomy or graph or spectrum between things which have agency and things which have which are more predetermined. So when you're dealing with something as complicated as the world, it's good to have a frame of reference that is not too one-sided. So what I'll see people who are atheistic and materialistic, which often are the same thing, but I understand not always. They will be very partial toward the one-sided, materialistic, deterministic explanation. They do not like agency for whatever reason. Maybe it's because somebody who believed they had a bad experience with somebody who believed in agency. They don't like the implications of agency. They don't like the implications of design. They find superficial logical contradictions with it, etc., etc. And on the other end, there are people who think that nothing is emergent, nothing is deterministic, or if something is emergent or deterministic or multiplicitous, then it is wrong. And both of these takes are unbalanced, and they are basically forms of monomania, forms of seeking singular explanations for things that in a world which is multipolar in almost every way. So I have created a graph that I can show you this spectrum visually. So without further ado, I'll show you. So as you can see on this graph, we have a y-axis going from agent to determined, and we have an x-axis going from necessary to emergent. And then in the corners, upper left corner, we have deity, upper right corner, we have spirit, bottom right corner, we have interaction, bottom left corner, we have law. Now, I think these things should be self-evident as to what they mean, but for those who would not be familiar with some of these terms, an agent is something that has personality. It is best described as a being that acts versus a sort of billiard ball that the universe pushes around from the past. Another way of saying this is that it can lodge attractor points in the future and move toward those attractor points, as opposed to being wholly at the mercy of an immense past and having no direct control over its future. So when something moves in a direction that it chooses in the future, that is an agent. Agents can be composed of multiple things. They can be composed of one thing, and their parts are not necessarily reflective of the whole. So for instance, you are made of parts. As is your city, as is your country. So countries are a sort of emergent form of agent, which would mean they're in the upper right corner, which is spirit. All right. So when somebody is being a nationalist, that means they're possessed by the spirit of their country. Or their spirit of their country overrides their personality, their individual agency, which would be, again, in the same way that the country is made of parts, a person is made of parts, organs, bones, ligaments, mind, etc. So there's that. Determined is the opposite of agentic or agent consciousness. Determined basically is just, instead of lodging probability points in the future and having interplay between future and past, you're pushed from the past. Fairly easy to explain. Necessary versus emergent. So a necessary thing is a thing that is fundamental to the cosmos. What this basically means is that it does not break down easily into parts. So for instance, an example of a necessary agent would be war. Also, charity. These first principles of mind basically would be a necessary agent. People might be more familiar with a determined necessary thing like a law of nature, such as gravity, or the manner in which things fall into vortexes, or things having weight, things having identity, these sort of immutable characteristics that we all learn about in high school physics and whatnot. So that would be necessary and determined, which would be like a law. A necessary agent would be a deity. And again, the difference between a deity and a law is that a deity has agency. A law has no agency. It doesn't react to its environment. It simply is a unchanging feature of the environment predetermined by the past, however you think that past occurred. A necessary agent or a deity has the ability to lodge attractor points in the future by virtue of sort of an emergent consciousness that comes out of its constituent elements. Okay, so again, a country is not necessary to reality. Something like karma or cause and effect is necessary to reality. So karma would be another example of a necessary agent. Whereas something like the United States, Ghana, the concept of a continent like South America as a political agent, all of these things are not necessary to reality. For instance, a country could vanish as they have done, and reality would keep moving relatively unmolested. It would be different, but it would keep moving. Things like cause and effect, things like war, things like charity, things like wisdom, these things would continue to happen even if, the map was just completely reshuffled. So an emergent determined thing is an interaction. So this is like basically a combination of laws in effect and producing sort of a chaotic sparkle. So let's say that because of the law of thermodynamics and the law of how electrons bind to each other, when you mix two chemicals together, they explode, or they produce a shower of blue sparks, or some other mystical seeming thing that is just the product of cause and effect, material laws, and past interactions just sort of playing themselves out. So you can predict how a determined emergent property will manifest. You cannot predict how an emergent agent will react. So you cannot use standard deterministic methods to predict how a country will react to stimulus. There are patterns to it, but you can't determine it specifically. You can, however, predict what will happen when you mix, sulfur, aluminum, and a certain amount of heat together. Right. So you might not be able to predict every exact thing about it, but you have a very, very good idea of what's going to happen. And if you had all the information, theoretically, you could have all of the end results of that product because it's entirely determined by the past rather than reacting to the past and an idealized future. So I hope this... Oh, there's one more thing also that I wanted to say before I wrap up. I want you to imagine a circle with a dot somewhere in this graph. It could be anywhere. So you could do it in the emergent agent category, which would be, like for instance, one example would be a nationalist. One example would be sort of a low magician, somebody who interacts with emergent agent beings, such as things that are not necessarily fundamental to reality, things like various spirits and ghosts and whatnot. But I think the thing that most people would be most familiar with would be nationalism, because nationalism is a spirit. And so when you have a circle with a dot and you slap it in the upper right corner, you could label that circle nationalism. Now, when you go out of that circle, everything starts looking strange to the nationalist because he identifies with his country, and when you start leaving that area, things get spooky to him. So now let's say we go slap the circle in the agent and necessary corner, upper left corner. So that would be a monotheist. Or you could do multiple circles, which would be a polytheist, which would tile more of the space. But if somebody's a monotheist, and depending on how strict they are, that circle would contract around the dot or it would expand around the dot. And as they move away from that, everything would start to scare them. You can see my latest reaction video, Jonathan Pajot and Sarah from Hamilton, for a perfect example of that. As they get further and further away from the light source, that circle with the dot, they start getting scared. Something that is necessary and determined, a law, you would go down there, you would find a materialist. Same thing, as things get farther and farther from materialism, they would be more and more scared. And emergent and determined, that would be sort of a chaotic space where people are just sort of interacting with the interactions without any sort of future will, and that, is in some ways a space that you can exist in too if you're not very sure of anything, and that has its own consequences. But that sun, that dot with the circle in it, or the circle with the dot in it rather, this is a sigil designed to show you ego. Now when you have, in some ways you cannot escape ego, but what you can do is you can expand the circle of your ego to encompass the whole graph, and you do that through understanding and wisdom. And if you are a monotheist or a person who only believes in necessary determined things and their interactions, then you will constantly be scared of the other parts of the graph, and you will find them as spooky and Halloween and upside down and the underworld and etc., etc. And as a result of that, you will find them to be alien to you, which they are not, because you are part of this world. And this world looks like this. So I hope this makes more sense. Let me know what you think in the comments. Bye.